At the end of the 2000 BTCC season, the Super Touring era officially came to an end, and it would see a new set of regulations being brought in that would slash the cost of the Super Touring regulations by around 40%. Whilst the fans were sad about the Super Touring regulations coming to an end, it was something that was needed in order to save the series, as from the end of 1998 to the end of 2000, manufacturers were pulling out left, right and centre, and something needed to be done in order to prevent more teams pulling the plug. The new regulations that were brought in from the start of 2001 would end up being known as the BTC-Touring regs, with the cars in question featuring more simpler aerodynamic parts, cheaper carbon fibre, and the cars also having either 2 or 3 doors as opposed to 5 like it was in the Super Touring era. Despite these changes, and also the cost being reduced significantly, it came too late for both Ford and Honda, who ended up pulling out of the series at the conclusion of the 2000 season. And whilst they would gain some new manufacturers in the form of Peugeot and later on MG, Vauxhall was the only manufacturer left from the final year of the Super Tourers that competed in the first year of the BTC Touring regs. This meant, as a result, they had a huge advantage compared to the rest of the field, even going as far as to run the car on only 70 to 80% full throttle in order to not fully embarrass the rest of the field. 888 Racing, which was the team that was running the Vauxhall Astras in 2001, would even go as far as to run a second team alongside the main team via their sponsorship deal with the now defunct Egg Banking. That team would consist of James Thompson, who moved over from the departing Honda team, and the debuting Phil Bennett, whilst the main team would consist of Ivan Muller and Jason Plato. And it would be this team that would cause all the headlines during the year. But before we get into the year that ended their relationship, let's go back to when the seeds for this iconic rivalry were first planted. Back in 2000, specifically on the first day of May, the BTCC fraternity made their way to Thruxton for rounds 5 and 6 of the 2000 season. During this particular weekend, the Vauxhalls were very quick compared to the 4 Mondeos, who had had a strong start to the season, winning 3 of the first 4 races. This pace transferred into qualifying, where Vauxhall would take pole in both races, with Muller taking pole for the sprint race and Jason Plato grabbing pole for the feature race. Whilst the sprint race would see no dramas, with Muller bringing his car home to his first win of the season, the feature race would be where the fireworks happened, as after both Jason Plato and Ivan Muller made their mandatory pit stop, which was a thing that was included in the BTCC back then, Jason, with a handful of laps to go, was ordered by his team to pull over to one side and allow his teammate Muller to go through, which allowed Muller to take the victory that day and ensure that he would be 6 points behind championship leader Alain Menu. This in turn annoyed Jason, as even though he had signed a deal to become the de facto number 2 to Ivan Muller, Jason believed that the deal that he signed was only meant to come into effect during the second half of the season, specifically if Ivan was in a situation where he was fighting for the title. And given that Jason was leading the championship going into the Thruxton meeting, you can understand why he felt betrayed in that instance, not helped by the fact that Vauxhall were not able to challenge Ford for the title that year anyway. Despite this though, and even a collision later on in the season at Alton Park, this wouldn't lead to any dissent between Ivan and Jason, and for 2001, and with both Ford and Honda pulling out, Jason's status in the team was upgraded to equal number 1 status with Ivan, meaning both of them could fight for the title. Despite this though, Muller would get the upper hand in the first half of the season, winning 6 of the first 10 races to give himself a comfortable 27-point lead ahead of Plato. However, at the next meeting at Donington Park, things would start to change, and it would end up being the start of their very intense rivalry. Going into race 1 at Donington, the grid would end up being yet another Vauxhall lockout on the first 2 rows, with James Thompson in the Egg Sport car on pole ahead of Ivan Muller, Phil Bennett and Jason Plato. Thompson would hold on to the lead at the start, whilst the 2 Vauxhall Motorsport cars would fight with Phil Bennett on the first lap, which ended very quickly after Bennett was turned around at the exit of McLean's by the Peugeot of Steve Soper. The top three would remain the same until the end of lap 3, when down at the Melbourne hairpin, Jason would dive it down the inside of Muller, but would end up sending him sideways, ripping his rear bumper off and gaining the place as a result. Whether the move from Jason was intentional or not, given on second glance it looked like he locked the rears, it didn't sit well with Ivan, as a couple of laps later, Ivan would lunge it down the inside of Jason at Goddard's to move back up to second. But their battle in the race wouldn't be done yet, as a couple of laps after the safety car came out, due to James Kay in the production class getting beached at the exit of the Fogarty S's, Jason would lunge it down the inside at the same corner on Ivan to reclaim P2, which he would hold on to for the remainder of the race, whilst James Thompson went on to take his second win of the season. Although both Ivan and Jason would joke about their intense battle after the race, there were clearly some unsettling nerves over at the Vauxhall Motorsport team. Nerves that would carry over into race 2, as once again the pair would have an intense battle. At the beginning of lap 19, and 2 laps after the safety car came in, Jason Plato, after failing to pass the Peugeot of Aaron Sly, who was still scheduled to make a pit stop, would get dive bombed at turn 1 by Ivan Muller, making contact in the process and leading to Jason colliding with the side of James Thompson, with the pair of them somehow being able to continue in the race. Jason not taking kindly to that, and after the pair of them dispose of the faltering Aaron Sly, with Jason getting his elbows out to get by, Jason, in an act of revenge, would punt the back of Ivan's car at Goddard, shoving him out wide on the exit to take the lead of the race, leaving Muller in the clutches of Thompson just after Muller tapped the back of Jason at Redgate. Plato would go on to win the race, whilst Muller would finish in third after losing the battle with James Thompson. This race would end up being quite crucial for Jason, as it would put his championship aspirations back on track, being 20 points behind Muller in the standings. The race would also be very significant, as it would see the momentum shift between the two drivers, as Jason would continue to eat into Muller's lead in the standings, so much so that after the second visit to Alton, Jason was now leading the championship by 10 points ahead of Muller. Throughout the 4 meetings that took place after that Donington meeting, nothing really much happened between the two teammates. However, come the series' second visit to the international layout of Silverstone, that would change in a big way. After losing points to Muller in the sprint race, Jason would line up for the feature race in second place behind the export car of Phil Bennett, whilst Muller was a row behind Jason in 4th. Muller would be able to gain a place at the start by jumping Thompson to move up to 3rd, whilst teammate Plato would barge his way past Bennett at Beckett to move into the lead, allowing Muller and Thompson to also go by. Then came the first bit of tension of the race, as Muller would grab the lead off Plato down at Abbey, despite being shoved on the grass by Jason in the approach to that corner. After the safety car came in due to a chaotic first lap involving the production class, the two teammates would go into combat once again, with Muller running wide at Beckett, leaving him and Jason side by side at the exit. And, repaying the favour from lap 1, Muller would be the one this time shoving Jason onto the grass, but this in turn would cost Muller the lead to Phil Bennett, who took full advantage of their very aggressive battle, with Thompson also disposing of Jason, dropping JP outside the podium places. Both Ivan and Jason would re-overtake Bennett and Thompson respectively, with Jason barging by Thompson at the exit of Bridge, whilst Muller would get the move done on Bennett at Brooklands Corner. Plato would then move up to second during the pit stop stages, as a result of Bennett being forced to pit due to an engine issue. Both Muller and Plato would maintain position after their mandatory pit stop, and with Muller controlling the pace up front, it looked like he was going to cruise to the win. However, with just a couple of laps to go, Jason was starting to reel in on Ivan as the Frenchman was nursing his tyres to get to the finish. Then, on the final lap, heading down to Bridge Corner, Muller experienced a slight engine cut, which saw him briefly go slow at the exit of Bridge and went on a defensive at Priory to try and prevent Jason from going by. JP, determined to take full advantage, found a gap on the inside, but the pair made contact, sending Muller sideways and breaking his front left suspension arm in the process. Plato would avoid getting serious damage and come through to take his 8th win of the season, whilst Muller, with a broken suspension arm, would limp across the line to finish 3rd, losing a place to Thompson at the exit of Lovefield. As you can imagine, Ivan was not happy, so much so that he refused to shake Jason's hand during the podium ceremony. The stewards were also not happy with the incident either, going as far as to giving Jason a 30-second time penalty, dropping him to third behind Muller and gifting Thompson the win. This meant that rather than Jason increasing his lead to 12 points, his lead had instead been cut to just 5 points ahead of Muller, and with the pair of them still miffed about the incident, it led to the Vauxhall Motorsport camp, in a Valentino Rossi and Jorge Lorenzo style, to split their garage in two. And with the pair of them still banging wheels and shoving each other off at the following meeting at Donington Park, which was the series' second visit to the circuit that year, it culminated in a title deciding meeting at the second visit to the Indy layout of Brands Hatch. And with the team's title wrapped up for Vauxhall Motorsport, the clubs were off between Jason and Ivan, and with Jason finishing ahead of Ivan in race 1 by finishing third, with Anthony Reid ending Vauxhall's streak of wins by taking MG's first ever win, it meant that going into the feature race, Plato led the championship by 6 points ahead of Muller. And with Muller starting second and Jason starting fourth, along with the MGs and the Team Ed Vauxhalls being in the mix, and with the track being soaking wet, the title could have gone either way. At the start, Ivan didn't react very well to the rolling start and would lose a place to Phil Bennett, nearly losing one to Plato. Muller would then re-overtake Bennett on the next lap at Paddock Hill Bend to retake second place from the export driver. Plato would also try to overtake Bennett on the same lap, but would fail to complete the move. And then on the following lap, disaster.
Trying to run around the outside. Now he's down the inside. He's taken the W. Plato's off. Unbelievable. Plato's gone straight across there. Unforced error. Keep it moving, mate. Keep it moving.
Pushing hard to try and close back up to Bennett after losing time to him, Jason would aquaplane on a wet patch at Surtees and spin off, just missing the wall on the outside. Plato would get going again, but he would drop to near the back of the pack, even falling behind a load of production class cars. And with Muller grabbing the lead off Hughes at the same time Jason had his spin, if it were to stay as it was, Muller would win the title. If Jason wanted to win his first BTCC title instead of Ivan, he would have to climb his way through the order. A few corners after Ivan took the lead, Bennett would also overtake Hughes down the inside at Graham Hill Bend to move up to second. A couple of corners later, and Muller would have a scare, aquaplaying at the same place Jason spun, but unlike JP, would go straight on the grass and lucky not to get any serious damage or even lose a place. Then, after Muller had his scare, the safety car would be brought out due to Roger Moen in the production class aquaplaning off at the exit of Paddock, beating his Peugeot 306 in the process. Whilst under safety car, it would end up being a disaster for MG, as both Warren Hughes and Anthony Reid would pull off with a mechanical issue, lifting Jason another 2 places in his fight back through the field. After a few laps, the safety car would come back in and the race would get going again, with Muller holding on to the lead from Bennett at the restart. A lap after the safety car came in, James Thompson came in for his mandatory pit stop, as did Jason Plato, who was quietly making his way through the production cars. A lap later, and race leader Muller would come in for his mandatory pit stop, handing the lead briefly to Phil Bennett before he pitted a lap later. A couple of laps after his pit stop, and Thompson would retire from the race after breaking his front right suspension while trying to overtake the production car of Steve Wood, moving Jason up another place. A lap or so later, and Dan Eves and the Peugeot would finally make his mandatory pit stop, just as Simon Grace crashed out at the exit of Paddock Hill Bend, and Muller went off again at Surtees, once again not losing a place. Then, a lap later, the safety car would be brought out again due to John Batchelor, the man responsible for putting York City into administration and was known as John B&Q in the series due to his sponsorship deal with the DIY Megastore, beaching his car at Clark Corner. Despite a scare he had at the exit of Paddock Hill Bend, Jason was now up into 4th, and with Muller getting the bonus point for leading a lap, he was now 2 places away from being in a championship winning position. However, unbeknownst to him, he wouldn't need to gain 2 places. Whilst following the safety car around, it became clear that the 2 excursions Muller had at Surtees had had an effect on his car, as underneath his car, a fire had started underneath his engine. Despite Ivan's best attempts at putting out the fire, given how wet the track was, the fire was getting worse, and 2 laps after it had ignited, Ivan was forced to pull over and retire from the race. This meant that regardless of where he was, Jason Plato was declared the 2001 British Touring Car Champion. But before he could celebrate, he still had to finish the race, and as the safety car came in, Jason started picking off production cars once again. Then on lap 47, Plato would dispose of Dan Eves at the top of Druids to move into second place, setting his sights on Bennett. Despite closing him in and doing his best efforts to pass him, he couldn't find a way through, and Phil Bennett would come through to take his third win of the season, whilst Plato would celebrate his title win with a brilliant recovery to second. It was an amazing and tense battle between the pair of them throughout the year, and the celebrations from Jason said it all. Despite this though, Jason would be out of a drive at the end of 2001, as due to Ivan still having a contract with Vauxhall and with their relationship being fractured, there was no way Jason was going to partner with Ivan for another year. Jason would end up stepping away from the BTCC, spending 2002 in the British NASCAR series known as ASCAR, yes that is the name of the series, before becoming a driver coach in 2003 with Seat. His partnership with Seat would ultimately be the reason he would return to the BTCC in 2004 with the Spanish manufacturer, once again banging door handle to door handle with Ivan Muller. As for Muller, he would once again lose the title in 2002, this time to new teammate James Thompson, who he would also have an intense rivalry with, before finally winning the title in 2003. He would lose both the 2004 and 2005 titles to James Thompson and Matt Neal respectively, with the latter ending Vauxhall's streak of titles. Ivan would end up leaving the BTCC at the end of 2005, moving over to the World Touring Car Championship with Seat, thus bringing to an end his rivalry with Plato. But luckily for Jason, he would end up having another rivalry that would end up being more fierce than the one he had with Ivan. But that's for another video later on down the line. Muller versus Plato, a fierce inter-team rivalry, and a rivalry that the BTCC needed after the Super Touring era came to an end.